Ué, Nindalo Cheryl Kapage, Wedabaxi Sipinagati, Chalasi Jabuktu Bimagi. My name is Cheryl Capage and I am the Community Indigenous Advisor with the Diversity and Inclusion Unit. I recently had the opportunity to share a short presentation called the 215 Residential School Reflections with our Diversity and Champions team table. After the session, many of our champions reached out and asked if I would record the session that was done and share it with so they can share it with their respective business units. This is my recording of the presentation. And please note, it has a few extra little things added in since I have a little bit of extra time to do it here. So I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. So this is my reflection. It's called the 215 plus reflections because since the date I did this presentation, there have been more undiscovered grave sites discovered at other residential school sites across Canada and the USA. So first, I always like to start off each session, and as I said earlier, Jalasi Jabuktu Mi'kmaq. So what that I'm saying with that sentence is welcome to Jabuktu, which is Halifax, the Great Harbor in my language, Mi'kmaq, which is our traditional and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. So our Mi'kmaq territory does not only cover Nova Scotia, but it covers a vast region. So our Mi'kmaq territory covers up from northern Quebec to Prince Edward Island to Newfoundland to New Brunswick, parts of Maine as well. So with that, we always like to give respect to the Mi'kmaq Nation, which we work, live, and benefit on the traditional lands of my ancestors and our modern communities today. So we always acknowledge our work that is being done in this territory. So this was an image that I wanted to share with everybody to start off the presentation. This was a drawing that was created by Whitney Gould of Wagaba First Nation. It's an image of two children whispering to each other. They found us. They finally found us. And that's a strong sentiment that is coming from all of our residential school survivors. They've been saying for years through sharing their stories, through their testimonials, through the truth and reconciliation process, stories about children who were killed and buried on site, who were buried in the walls, who just all of a sudden were there one day and then were gone. So many of these children were never made it home to their families, to their communities. These families and communities never got to know what happened to these individuals. And the Kamloops school, the 215 children that were found there is just one example. And these, as you're seeing now, the number continues to grow. In this imagery, you'll see that the sky is orange, which the artist did to represent the children that were lost at the school that didn't make it back. And you'll see the image of the eagle up above, which is one of our sacred animals, which represents love. But it also is one of the animals that traditionally can soar to the spirit world. So what this imagery is saying that we found them, we finally found them, and our eagle spirit, who's filled with love, is taking them and guiding them to the spirit world finally. That they can finally have some rest and some closure because we found them. And we're going to continue searching and find the rest of them. So the Kamloops Indian Residential School, most people have heard about it. This is the site where the 215 children were found in an unmarked grave on the school system. The Kamloops Indian Residential School was part of the Canadian residential school system, established as a part of the government policy for forced assimilation that resulted in the oppression of generations of Indigenous children. This was one of 130 schools that operated in Canada from 1874 to 1996. I want to just reflect on that number for a second. In 1996, what were you doing? I know what I was doing. I was already married. I had 3 children. I was in university. And it's so hard to comprehend that in Saskatchewan in 1996, Indigenous children were still being forced to attend a residential school. So it's important that we reflect upon these things. And it was one of 130 schools. And if you really want to go back a little further, the residential school, this type of schooling process was long in place. It started in the 1800s when the Jesuit priests at the time were trying to teach Indigenous children about religion and the Catholic religion and to give them some spirituality because they felt that their spirituality wasn't sufficient enough. And it's been long documented through lots of research, historical documents, and paperwork that was done by the government. The sole purpose of the Indian residential schools were to take the Indian out of the child, to get them to be able to assimilate into mainstream society. They felt our language, our culture, and our traditions were simple, to be polite, and not civilized enough for us to be part of the larger Canadian citizenship here within Canada. So they did lots of work to ensure that our children would lose a significant piece of their culture. And if you take away their language, you take away our culture and traditions, you're taking a huge part of who we are away. There was many policies in place, and even kind of going back a little bit further, the residential schools actually came into place the same time, the official residential schools that were sanctioned by the Canadian government came in place around the same time as Canada became a country. So as Canada became a country, they developed a policy called the Indian Act. And under the Indian Act, the act required Indigenous children to be sent to residential school, that it was mandatory, and that the Indian Act, the Indian agent at the time, had the authority to take these children, to rip these children from their communities, their families, and take them and put them into these residential school systems. So like I said, it was one of 130 schools that operated in Canada. There are many more day schools that were in place as well. And I'll explain very quickly the difference between a day school and a residential school. The Indian residential school, they stayed there all year. Sometimes they were allowed to leave during summer months, but many children never made it home, never were allowed to go home to school because they deemed that their family or community wasn't fit to have them back. Some children, so they developed what was called day schools, Indian day schools in First Nations communities. And at the day schools, these children also suffered from many abuses that happened and lost their language. They were taught by nuns. The only difference between these two schools was the children at the day school were allowed to go home at the end of the day. So that's the slight variation between them. And there is a residential school settlement that has been in place, and also recently a day school settlement that has been in place from the government, providing restitution for the Indigenous children that were forced within these school systems. So here in our territory, in the Mi'kmaq territory, we had the Shubenacadie Residential School. It ran from September 1st to 1929, or it ran from September 1st, 1929 to June 30th, 1967. If you see the image on the right here, you'll see there's 3 houses on this road, and these 3 houses still exist. The Robinson families they're Indigenous people, and they were caretakers that lived in the house. They were gardeners, and they were seamstress, and they had sewing machines, but their family still is in these houses. And where the residential school is on the hill, on that site stands right now the Scotia Plastics Factory. So the school has burnt down, but on their footprint, a Scotia plastic factory has been formed. And in behind, where there were other buildings and farmlands and that, there's still a large farm area behind there. If you look at the picture on the right left-hand side, you'll see a priest and some young gentlemen. And and I'm going to say this, most Indigenous people you meet from this region, you are either going to meet a first or second generation survivor of a residential school. I myself am a second generation. Both of my parents went to day school. My grandfather, my grandmother went, and my grandfather here in the picture is Simon Nevin. He was the chief at the time when the residential school was in existence. And he would spend time going down to the school to make sure that the children were being taken care of to the best of his abilities, but he didn't see what was going on behind closed doors. But he did check on the children. And in this picture that you see here, four of these gentlemen are still alive within my community. And many of them have children and grandchildren and great grandchildren now. So we have probably some third generation survivors, some third generation from a residential school survivors now. So with my grandfather being Chief Simon Nevin, we did have a little bit of privilege. His wife had got sent to residential school when she was younger. Then she got out, she met him, married him. She was actually from Indian Island, and then she met him in Shubenacadie, and then they married and had children. Their oldest child was sent to residential school, but some of the younger children under that were not sent because he became chief. And with that, he had a little bit of leverage, and he was able to uh, get it so his children were sent to day school. So I did some research and I found from the Indian Residential School archives this paragraph here that was written about the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School. The Shubenacadie School was the only residential school for Indigenous children established in the Maritimes. So with that saying, all Indigenous children, whether you're Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, Passamaquoddy, in this territory were sent to this school. So we've had survivors from Listigouche, Quebec, down to parts of New Brunswick where the Passamaquoddies are, and in New Brunswick where the Maliseets are, and the Mi'kmaq Nation as well, here in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and New Brunswick. So this was the only school in the Maritime. From its founding, this school suffered from poor construction, poor maintenance, and overcrowding. In 1934, a federal inquiry was held into the flogging of 19 boys at the school. A doctor at the time testified that the flogging had left the boys with permanent scars, but the judge heading the inquiry said the boys got what they deserved. Can you imagine? The judge said the boys got what they deserved. They got a very severe beating that left permanent scarring. It was also an acceptable practice in the school that the children operated the laundry and kitchen equipment, which led to a number of serious documented injuries. By the 1960s, it was recognized that the school had lacked the resources and staff to meet the needs of children placed in its care, and in 1967, it was closed. Many of our survivors tell stories about their friends being there one day and then being gone the next, gone missing. They've also heard stories about children or babies being born at the school and put into the large furnace that was there at the school, in their boiler room, where the children were incinerated or cremated. There's also stories along the riverbank where they say the nuns were punishing children and dunking them in the water. And sometimes the punishments went too far and children have died. So we're now gathering all of these stories, which leads us to the next slide. The search continues here in the community. Since the 215 children were discovered in the unmarked grave in Kamloops, it's ignited searches at all of the other residential schools across the country and in the United States as well. Several of the other schools have noted already that they discovered some undisclosed graves, and our search at the Shubenacadie Residential School is just beginning. So the Shubenacadie Band Council, in collaboration with Dr. Filer from St. Mary's University, and Roger Lewis is our Mi'kmaq archaeologist that is the counter lead on it, in the guidance with our residential school survivors and some of our Grand Council members, are doing a very comprehensive search of the site, but there's many things that are going to be happening within this search. So historically, we need to do our historical mapping of the and put all of our historical mapping that we have done when we were searching for a mission bell into the system, into a geographic information system. We had to do aerial laser mapping using light detection and range technology called LiDAR. We had to do new aerial imagery from a Wingtra 1 drone. We have ground penetrating radar for additional areas identified by our community members, townspeople, and our survivors from across the Maritimes about stories where they think individuals or graves or burial sites could be. We also are reaching out to our surrounding towns and communities and villages within the area because at this time, after the school have closed, there's been lots of work done in this area. There's large farms, as you can see in the picture in the background, and some of the former workers at the farm have called up and disclosed to us that when they were younger working at the farm, the owner would tell them if they come across bones that they are not to report them, that if they do, they will lose their jobs. So they're now as adults have finding the bravery to come forward and share their stories about their days after the school had closed working on these sites. So we're looking and building a comprehensive picture of the site. None of these historic buildings are found there. Through our first kind of run through of the area, we found the old road which connected to the residential school to some of the other sites, that other buildings that were a part of the residential school in Shubenacadie. So that's allowing us to now piece together and develop this comprehensive picture of what the site would have looked like historically. So now we can place where we're going to be doing these targeted searches. We have to do terrestrial geophysics. There's 2 stages to that, which is geometrics mapping and geo-GPS. And he's using these 2 different devices, which detect magnetics in soil through the orange one, and the other one's like a GPS kind of lawnmower, which he'll just follow the lines right now that are in the field to do an initial search. So the search continues, and it's going to take a while for us to gather all these stories and do this very comprehensive search for the site that's in Shubenacadie. So as I was saying earlier, one of the major goals of the schools was to take the Indigenous out of the child. And their main tactics for doing this was to take away our language. Because if you take away our language, you take away such a big part of our history, our culture, because one word can mean so much. It can mean so much. It's not just a simplified English, it's not a simple translation. We are verb based. Our language is so descriptive that it taking away and discouraging and making our children not speak Mi'kmaq has been a huge detriment to our culture. So Rita Joe, who's a famous Mi'kmaq poet from Eskasoni, was also a residential school survivor. And she wrote this poem called Lost My Talk, and I thought I would share it with you. I lost my talk, the talk you took away. When I was a little girl at the Shubenacadie school, you snatched it away. I speak like you. I think like you. I create like you. The scrambled ballad about my word. The 2 ways I talk, both ways I say. Your way is more powerful. So gently I offer my hand and ask, let me find my talk so I can teach you about me. And that's kind of the journey I'm on right now. As a 2nd generation Indigenous person from a survivor. My grandmother, as I said, was in residential school. Both of my parents were in residential school. I don't speak our Mi'kmaq language, but I'm learning it. And I'm learning how beautiful and how rich our language is with the culture. So I'm learning more about myself, my traditional cultures, my practices. And as I'm learning, I'm sharing this with all of my counterparts here within the city. So I'm very proud when I speak my language at the beginning of the ceremony because it was something I wasn't able to do 3 years ago. So with that, I'd like to share this video. This video was actually done by high school students at the Eskasoni First Nation School. They have a very great program where they learn about the language, the culture, our traditions, and they developed this about our gentle warrior. And I'm going to play it for you now. More than 60 community languages are presently spoken in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities across Canada. Let's see if I can get this to play. These languages have defined the identity of their people for generations. Over the past 125 years, assimilation policies of various Canadian governments, such as enfranchisement and residential school systems, have left many Indigenous languages extinct or endangered. Thousands of years of knowledge, beliefs, values, and culture are slipping away. This song is dedicated to the Indigenous people of Canada, both past and present.
I am the one who walks like a king. I am the one who cares not always to win. The wars I do not care, they hurt us all. You make it so hard, you always want to win. Please believe we care and do understand. I am the one who walks like a king.
By the gentle warrior's word, taught to forgive but not forget. Your words are weak, my voice is strong. It carries in the wind, it carries in a song. I'm trying to speak but I can't find my words. They snatched it away, shattered my world. Don't say that I can't, don't pretend that I'm yours. Free me so my spirit can soar. As a warrior, I'm stronger. Walk the path, follow the star. Feed the soul with tales of old. In the shadows we dance, in the dark we light. With the river we flow, with the earth we cry. I'm trying to speak, but I can't find my words. They snatched it away, shattered my world. Don't say that I can't, don't pretend that I'm yours. Free me so my spirit can soar. As a warrior, I'm stronger.
From the point to the light that's coming from the dark, so we held so deep from the very start. When I was standing next to our elders, and oh my, feeling a little confused, cause you know why? We lost our talk, but who would ever thought that we got people speaking language living in the block, but we got no clue to what they're really saying. It's sad that better what our culture was explained to our main with speech is pain that we had to learn. Dance with the spirits, just a pillow of burn. Man, it's all mixed up all across the nation. Residential schools placed inside of a reservation. You take us to rapists, we take us to places and reservations, but we never made it order. We take a pride and ball it up, cheer. A gentle warrior.
Meet beyond the distant shore, where lies and myths are no more. are the wings carry us away. I'm trying to speak, but I can't find my words to dash it away and shatter my world. I lost my talk, my courage, my pride. For 500 years it's been hiding inside. No more hurt, no more sorrow, no more fear, no more shame. I'm asking the Lord, see I'm going insane. Give me truth, give me knowledge, give me honor, no more blame. Give me hope, give me freedom, give me love, no more pain. I'm trying to speak, but I can't find my words to dash it away and bury my world. I lost my talk, my courage, my pride. 500 years it's been hiding inside. No more hurt, no more sorrow, no more fear, no more shame. I'm asking the Lord, see I'm born insane. And darling, see you know. On my great brave, guide me so my spirit can soar. I'm a gentle warrior.
Yes, I found my talk. It stayed. I never forgot it.
Without the languages, we are warm bodies without a spirit. So you ask, what can you do? You've heard the news about the 215 plus sites being discovered, the children being discovered in unmarked graves. What can you do? You can, I just came up with a couple of suggestions. You can learn about the indigenous communities whose land you live and work on. Learn more about the Mi'kmaq community. Learn more about our history. When available, participate in a blanket ceremony training. As soon as we're allowed to gather in training spaces again, I'll be rolling out blanket ceremony training. So please come and participate. It's an interactive way of learning hundreds of years of Indigenous history in an interactive approach. Read the Truth and Reconciliation reports. They're all available online, and I'm working right now on uploading them to all of the internet so everybody can have access to these reports. If not, you can find them currently online by just Googling it, and it's there. You can visit the Downey Winjack Legacy Space, which is located in our HRM City Hall, in our City Hall in Halifax. You can watch Gord Downey's Secret Path, which is a visual story about Channy Winjack, who ran away from a residential school and froze on his way home, trying to get home to his family and his community. It's so powerful. Just take the opportunity to watch it. It's Secret Path. Create opportunities to amplify Indigenous voices in all of the work that you do. Make land acknowledgements in Indigenous culture part of events that you're hosting. As I'm doing today, wear orange shirts, not only on September 30th, anytime, in recognition of our residential school survivors, and especially on September 30th, which is National Truth and Reconciliation Day. And if you don't know the story behind the orange shirt, very quickly, it's a story about a young Indigenous girl who was being sent to residential school for the first time, and her parents had bought her an orange shirt, which she was so proud of. And when she got to residential school, they took this orange shirt and she never, ever got it back. And it's something that sticks in her head. So every time she saw an orange shirt, it reminded her of that experience. So she shared this story, and now it's a book, and it's now becoming a day where we recognize, where all students in schools wear orange shirts to honor and recognize our Indigenous survivors of residential school. And there's some things you can do right in the city, like visit our Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center and our local Indigenous communities here in HRM. We have 3 communities located here, which is the Sibonagity First Nation, Acadia First Nation, and Millbrook First Nation. They all have reserve lands really within the boundaries of our municipality. Take an opportunity to go there and just go to the community and meet some of the people, engage in some of their cultural activities when they have gatherings again. So as I was stating, the work continues here. There's the search is still continuing in Shibenagity, and the findings will be shared with our survivors and the larger communities as we find out about it. Just recently on Indigenous History, on Indigenous Peoples Day, June 21st, the survivors of the Shibenagity Residential School did their Freedom March. And I'm going to share a little bit of a story. There was a gentleman that was at the march. He was, as I may have said earlier, but when you went to residential schools, the children were required to have numbers on their underwears and socks so they knew who each child was. So this gentleman was number 1 on his socks and underwears was 1. He was the one who was always put in line first. And he said he was 5 years old when he entered the school, and he was number 1. And he was always the one who was first in line. So he was the first in line to get a beating. He was the first in line he said he would get beat sometimes with his own shoes. At other times, he would be crying because he was sad and lonely, missed homes. He would get beatings, so he would stop that. And then he would get beatings on top of that because he was crying because of the beating. So it was a continuous cycle for him. And the day that they looked forward to each year when some of the students were allowed to go home was June 21st. That's the day that the nuns would fill up a box with sandwiches, a shoebox with sandwiches, and give them 1 change of clothes in a plastic bag and send them on their journey down the road from the residential school to the then train station in Shibenagity. This year was the first march. We walked with our survivors who are still here and their families and supporters and community, the same walk that these children did every year until the school closed. That was the lucky children that got to go home. So it's important that we remember that day. It's going to be Freedom March, and it's going to continue on every year from now on. Also, the Shibenagity Indian Residential School has got historic site designation. The Confederacy of Mainland Micmacs will be doing a plaque unveiling on September 30th, 2021 this year. Also, we have our National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th, 2020. It's an opportunity for your business units to do something to recognize this. Could be as simple as getting everybody orange t-shirts or masks and wearing them and recognizing this day, and taking opportunities to learn more about the culture. I understand that this information can be very upsetting, so I just wanted to provide some resources that are available. There's a 24-hour residential school crisis line that you can access at 1-866-925-4419, or we have HRM's Employee and Families Assistance Program that you can access as well. I'm also currently in the process of developing a residential school resource tool, which will highlight some of this information I talked about here, that will be available on the internet very soon. So with that, I just want to say thank you for taking this opportunity to listen to this presentation and to learn more about the Indian Residential School. In my language, we don't say goodbye, so I'm going to say namoltis, which means I'll see you later, and walalio, which means thank you for taking the opportunity to listen to this story. And please, whatever you do, just continue to be on a learning journey, because it's a learning journey. And reconciliation is not one easy step. It's multiple steps along this path. And we're all on this journey together because we all are treaty people here in the Atlantic. And we all need to work collaboratively together to make sure that the Indigenous community is sheltered, supported through all of these traumas that we're currently refacing right now. So once again, Namoltis Walalio.